Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a fantastic Christmas. It's Boxing Day for those of you who observe it as a day, which means a lot of football on over in the UK. I'll be watching a few games here myself and preparing for a trip in February where my 17-year-old son and I, the one that I talk about so much that plays the game, we're going to be going to see 3 matches in the UK. West Brom, we're going to Caledonian Braves in Glasgow, and then we're going to see Man United at Spurs. So pretty excited about that. But the other thing that happened a lot on Christmas was that all of you, and I mean pretty much all of you, were commenting to let me know that Salmonella released a new video, which he did, in fact, do. And so we're going to take a look at it. This one's called Pliny Explains It All, the Historia Naturalis, Abridged, books 1 and 2. So a little bit about this before we dive into it. Pliny the Elder dies in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD while he was trying to rescue a friend. And he was not in Pompeii, but there were a lot of other places that were buried as well. And he ended up dying in that eruption. But before his death, he recorded what remains the longest and most complete series of books that we have from the Roman period. This would have been the Roman Empire at this point. And I think there's something like, I don't know how many volumes there are. There's at least 10. There may be more than that, but it looks like he's going to take a look at the first 2 today. A lot of science, a lot of history, a lot of really good stuff, and it looks like we're looking at books 1 and 2 today, which I think deal a lot with animals. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know a lot about the details of what he recorded. I know a little bit about the science, where he wrote down things like the fact that they knew that the moon was about 240,000 miles away from the Earth, which is a pretty dang good guess. It wasn't a guess, it was science. They roughly knew the circumference of the Earth. They knew it was round. They estimated it to be 24,000 miles around, which is only about 1,000 miles off of what's actually the case, which is remarkable to me. And so I think he gets into some of that in later parts of the book. And a lot of these volumes are just collecting information that other scientists that have done, and he's just kind of putting it all in one place. It's kind of like an encyclopedia is what this is. So I love the way that Salmonella kind of presents his material, so it's going to be interesting to dive into this one. The original link is in the description. I'm trusting you've all already seen it. Let's dive in.
Hey persons of age. So, long before the era of the wiki, there used to be these things called encyclopedias, where for a small fee of thousands of dollars, they would mail you a tiny fraction of the knowledge we have access to today.
That is so accurate. We actually had these at home, and you actually would have salesmen that would come around and like sell them to you, and you might buy a couple of volumes at a time, like, because they were super expensive, and by the time you collected the whole thing, you had invested a lot of money, or you just go down to the library. It's so remarkable in my lifetime how access to information has changed so dramatically.
And you could put it on a shelf, and it would sit there and make you look learned. But while not reading an encyclopedia is easy, not creating one is much easier, and yet we do it. Encyclopedia Britannica is still in circulation today, and it's maintained by around 100 full-time editors and more than 4,000 contributors.
Wow.
So whose idea was this? Who was the first person to sit down and say, today I feel like writing down everything? To answer that, we must look nearly 2,000 years in the past, to the mid-70s AD. Pliny the Elder, author, philosopher, veteran, imperial administrator, and one curious buckaroo. Early in his life, Pliny's father took him to Rome to study law. Then, as a young adult,
the eldest. The reason we call him Pliny the Elder is because he had a nephew who I think he later adopted as his son, who we call Pliny the Younger.
Spent several years as a junior officer in the Roman military. His interest in literature made him a few high-ranking friends there, and when he came home, he took to writing. Unfortunately, a certain apocryphal fiddler was in charge at the time, who wasn't exactly kind to intellectuals. So Pliny kept it on the DL, mostly writing about things like grammar and rhetoric, which at the time few people found worth freaking out over. Fortunately, in June of 68, Nero finally took a hint and killed himself, and following the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, one Vespasian came out on top.
So the Year of the Four Emperors, we've talked about this some. This was 69 AD, and it does end up with Vespasian at the top, who is the same guy who oversaw. He was kind of dealing with the troubles in the east, and then his son Titus is the one who will actually complete the conquest of Jerusalem and destroy the temple and everything in 70 AD.
Vespasian was a general and a friend of Pliny's, so when he became emperor, he promoted Pliny to procurator, which was like the governor of a province. Suddenly, with this guy on the throne and a cushy job to pay the bills, Pliny found himself in a position to make complete use of his own potential. By day, he continued his administrative duties, but during nights, he wrote. And over the course of a few years, with nothing but his own wits and whatever authors he could get his hands on, he created a work known as the Historia Naturalis.
Awesome.
This consisted of 37 books, each broken up into many dozens of chapters, covering just about every topic there is. While it wasn't quite an encyclopedia in the modern...
And I believe then they were put into 10 volumes, so that when I said earlier I thought there was a dozen, I was thinking of volumes, but the books, 37. Think about this and how remarkable this is. And there are things that he recorded that he had access, information he had access to that we have since lost, but because he compiled it, we still have it today.
Sense, it's still the earliest surviving attempt at an all-encompassing scholarly work, and it is a trip. I've been reading it. It is fascinating, not only as a reflection of what people did and did not know in the Roman Empire, but also as a reflection of Pliny himself, who is a character and who made zero attempt to hide it. So today, I come to you with a brief summary of the first part of a brief summary of all human knowledge according to one dude circa 77 AD. Now,
I want to know, though, is he going to do all 37 books? This video is only 1 and 2. I mean, here's the thing, when you're creating content, and it's very similar when you're writing a book, which, I've written several books, and or just as a minister doing sermons week after week, it's difficult to sometimes come up with ideas for what you're going to do. So having something that's going to keep you busy for a while, like a sermon series when you're preaching, really helps. Or like when I'm teaching Sunday school, I might go through an entire book of the Bible for the span of a couple of months. So if this is what he's going to do for the foreseeable future, this gives him some focus and gives him a place to go and gives him good source material for that. So it'd be pretty interesting.
Now, the original thing makes for a fairly long read. Even removing most of the more uninteresting details, I've only managed to fit the first 2 books into today's video. As for the other 35, we'll see. I'm gonna let Pliny do the narration himself using my voice. He gets a lot of things shockingly right and a lot shockingly wrong. Rather than constantly chiming in with fact checks, I'm just gonna throw chess.com analysis icons in the corner for every claim he makes. I'll also provide relevant snippets of the actual text I'm paraphrasing just for reference. If you're one of the people who likes to pause the video just to see the funny ha-has I snuck into the freeze frame, rest assured there will be none today. You can just let it play. One last warning, while there is a loose overall structure to this thing, it also seems like Pliny just kind of wrote whatever was in his head for a given chapter. He has a habit of jumping back and forth between completely disparate topics and going on weird personal tangents in between. I am presenting this thing in the exact order it's written, so if it at any point seems utterly scatterbrained, it's his fault, not mine.
It's his fault, not mine. I love that he gave that whole intro, though, to kind of explain where this is all going. And one of the things you have to do when you're making videos on YouTube is you start to, after a while, when you start to get certain reactions and comments from people, you start to try and get out in front of those things by commenting about it first, so you can, like, bring down the number of times you're going to have to respond to the same comment.
Anyway, take it away.
Dedication. He did a dedication.
Yo.
That was awesome.
Right, let me get right ahead of things. These books are strictly about this world and the things we can see around it. If you're one of those madmen who think there are other worlds beyond this one, give it a rest, alright? That's psychotic. You can't know these things, and you can't grasp infinity. Stop trying, you'll hurt yourself. So the heavens are a perfect sphere, and they spin around us perfectly. It takes 24 hours for them to do one spin, which is actually really fast because the universe is huge. In fact, massive objects...
I love the fact that even in the beginning, Pliny is acknowledging that we know that there are infinite numbers of worlds out there beyond our own.
All whooshing around us this fast should be incredibly loud at all times. Why isn't this the case? The whole shebang is composed of 4 elements, right, which sort themselves by weight. Earth is heaviest, so it falls to the middle of everything, into a sphere, and it stays still. It's the only still thing. On top of that is water, then air, and fire's the lightest, which is why the sun and stars are made of it. The sun kicks ass, easily the best of the 7 things up there. Basically a god, not literally.
And by 7 things, what he's talking about are... He called them 7 planets, which again, this kind of gives you that idea that they kind of had a little bit of an understanding of things. So he calls the moon and the sun among those things. And then, of course, you would have the known planets at that time, which would be Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter.
Really. Don't try to answer questions about God's nature, by the way. You'll just confuse yourself. There's at most one God, and he's everything, and he doesn't do weird human shit like getting jealous or banging other gods. I swear.
So it's interesting, too, that he acknowledges that the idea of one God, which, of course, in the Roman Empire was not how typically things were done. You had the Jews and the Christians by this point in Pliny's time, but Christianity and Judaism are certainly tiny minorities of the Roman Empire.
Where people just make up new gods every time they want something specific. Let me tell you, there was a temple on Palatine Hill dedicated, through my tax dollars, by the way, to fever, like the illness. You understand that's bad shit, right? Things like that are why we've got more gods than people at this point. Folks in other countries worship animals and obscene things like stinking meats. There are gods of theft and other crimes. It's all folly. You want to be godly? Just help others. That's the way of the old Roman nobles, and that's the way of the noblest noble of all, Emperor Vespasian Augustus, who may or may not be my best buddy. But anyway, if there is a god, he doesn't care about what you do. People put crazy emphasis on the religion, avoiding
So Pliny was actually kind of a deist. I mean, he's like, yeah, there may be a god, a single god, but he's not involved in the affairs of men. And that is kind of the idea of deism, which is going to be very popular nearly 2,000 years later.
Foods, worrying themselves sick about all kinds of sacred rules. Look, I hang around the Capitol. There's a lot of rat bastards in politics, real scumbags, and they are thriving. You don't need to
It's got AU, which is the symbol for gold.
To yourself. Have a bacon. Nobody gives a shit. Back to the stars, which, by the way, also don't give a shit about you specifically. For big history-changing stuff, yeah, they'll act up, but you...
The nature of celestial bodies is eternal, being interwoven, as it were, with the world, and by this union rendering it solid. I know what's going to happen. This video is going to make me end up wanting to read Pliny's volumes.
Reader, do not need to worry. Anyway, most of them are fixed in a sphere really high up there. We'll call this the heavens. Between the heavens and the earth, there are 7 other bodies to talk about. Highest up there, we got Saturn, then there's Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. The heavens spin to the right.
All right, so when I was talking about it earlier, I was forgetting that he wouldn't have been counting Earth as one of them, so Saturn would be.
All these guys spin to the left. Saturn is cold, Mars is hot, but Jupiter's just right. The Sun's orbit is made up of 360 degrees, 1 degree per day, except not quite. We have to add 5 1/4 days or else our sundials break. Down to Venus and Mercury, these guys are weird because they like to hang around the sun. Fun fact, Venus is actually bright enough to help out the sun and moon sometimes. When it's helping the sun,
so even in the surnames, rivaling the sun and the moon, for when it precedes the day and rises in the morning, it receives the name Lucifer, as if it were another sun. And yeah, Lucifer in the Bible is referred to as the morning star, which is something we also call Venus sometimes.
Sun, we call it Lucifer, the light bringer. And when it's helping the moon, we call it Vesper, the sleepy time guy. Mercury tries to do the same thing, but he's much more lame and cringe, so he can't. The moon's got phases, as you know, and she gets closer and farther away at different times. And Daimion figured out lots of cool info about the moon's orbit, and you assholes bullied him for it. Yeah. This man unraveled the secrets of the universe, and in return, everyone goes, ho ho ho, he's in love with the moon. That's because humans are sick in the head. They'd rather read stories about bloodshed and massacres like that matters more than the fabric of reality. Get a clue. Anyway, the moon has phases because of the way it borrows light from the sun, which might be what these other guys do too.
It's remarkable to me. The more and more I study about the Roman Empire, and of course the Greeks before them, and then there are others as well, the Egyptians, and you had the Arabs at the time of the House of Wisdom and things like that. The knowledge that we had at times is remarkable to me. The things that we take for granted, that we think are only recent discoveries, are things that we've actually known for a really long time.
We don't know yet. All those spots on it are actually puddles because it likes to draw up moisture from the earth, which is where we get the tides. And every now and then it casts its shadow on Earth. We call these eclipses, and they are freaking wicked. Eclipses can happen the other way around too, and the way these happen prove that the moon is bigger than the Earth and the sun's way bigger than both of them. Oh, and just so we're clear, eclipses are a natural thing. It's not the apocalypse or God's wrath. They follow rules. Even the Greeks could predict them. Settle down. Back to the planets. They're all kind of in the same...
It is interesting how he gets stuff really, really right, but then there's stuff that they just didn't know as well.
same belt up there, and they all get farther and closer to us at different points because their orbits are complicated. They mostly follow the same rules as each other, but there's some goofiness, like the ones further than the sun move the slowest when they're the farthest away from us, but the closer ones move the quickest then. We can chalk this up to the sun emitting vapors that must push them around in weird ways. Thunderbolts come from Jupiter, and we don't know why. One theory is that it's because Saturn is very moist and Mars is very fiery, and when they meet in the middle, we get celestial fire thrown down at us.
It's not the worst theory in the world, but obviously you can see how when they didn't have a good scientific way of figuring something out, there are still the elements of mythology and the gods and things like that.
Same reason a wet log crackles and throws off embers in a fire. There is a type of star that moves around and vanishes. We call these comets, and they come in all kinds of flavors. These might actually be omens. I mean, there have been some weird coincidences. Some people think comets are permanent, and we only see them when they swing by the right way, while others say they're just flare-ups of celestial vapor that dissipate on their own. Now to talk about some real anomalies, things we've only rarely seen. The sun goes dim sometimes, like when Caesar got killed. Matter of fact, during the Civil War with Mark Antony, it stayed dim for like a year. Multiple suns have been seen at the same time.
And we know that at certain times, I don't know what exactly caused that to happen around the time of the Battle of Actium, but at times there are significant volcanic eruptions that spew so much ash into the atmosphere that it can cause the global temperature to change by a couple of degrees, which doesn't sound like much, but it's huge. Crops fail, and it dramatically affects the weather.
On several occasions, but no more than 3. 3's the record. Same with moons. One time, a burning shield darted across the sky, throwing sparks as it went. Another time, someone saw a shooting star fly towards us until it was as big as the moon, and then it turned around and went back to being a normal comet. Side note, even the translator was like, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. Finally, there are the stars Castor and Pollux. If you see both of them, it's good luck, but be advised, if one's alone, he turns into a little bastard. He can and will come down and set your boat on fire. That's the celestial sphere taken care of. Now let's move down a peg to the air. The air ends way before the moon, and it mixes with water vapor to create the weather.
True.
The sun dries up water on the earth, it goes up and turns into clouds, and then it's pushed back down.
That, again, is remarkable to me that they knew about things like evaporation. That's impressive stuff.
Again by the star forces that keep stuff on Earth. We get rain and hail and such, and it keeps going round and round like some kind of water cycle. The seasons go around once a year, and we don't know exactly why, but it definitely has to do with the motion of the stars. Like some are wet or dry, hot or cold, and that influences the climate when they move, especially.
So one of the things, I just want to stop and talk about this in a historic context, because I think there are a lot of people who have this idea that, for a long time, many people grew up, even in our generation, with the notion that, for example, Christopher Columbus proved that the Earth was round because most people thought it was flat. And of course, we know that's not the case. We know all the way back to the Greeks, long time before Pliny, that we knew the Earth was round and relatively close to how big it was. But I think the difference is that today in our world, a lot of scientific knowledge is widely known by most people. Like pretty much everybody except for a fringe few out there know the Earth's round. But at Pliny's time, there's probably a lot greater gap between the knowledge of more educated people and your average farmer, for example, or shepherd in a field. There's a big difference between those who are literate and those who are not. And so maybe some of the misunderstanding that we have about what people knew 2,000 years ago comes down to the fact that the average knowledge was different than it is today. Not everyone had access to that knowledge. Just the educated, the elite, fewer people did. Now, a much greater percentage of the population knows these basic things.
Saturn, he always soaks the place going by. He's a freak, actually. Oh, I almost forgot the dog star. This guy's nuts. It kindles the sun's vapors, and when it rises, the ocean gets upset, wine ferments, and stagnant waters are set in motion. And there's a creature called the oryx in Egypt, and when the dog star goes up, they look at it and they sneeze. out of warship. It also makes dogs go rabid, hence the name. But the stars and the seasons they create have profound effects on nature, and it's not just the weather changes that do it. Some flora and fauna have weird links to the heavens. Pelagium blooms right on the winter solstice, even when hung up to dry in the house, and heliotrope follows the sun even when it's cloudy. The moon makes oysters bigger and ants lazier, and diseases in the eyes of livestock will grow and diminish based on its phase. That's just a few examples. Hey, let's talk about the winds. The ancient Greeks have published a lot of great observations about the winds. Those were warish, disconnected times, which makes their work all the more impressive. Nowadays, in this great peace, every shore of this sea welcomes Romans. And what are we doing? When's the last time we sent anybody out to investigate this world with inquiry in their heart? Plenty of expeditions, sure, but that's just because you got some shit to sell. Rather than pursue science that could benefit all of mankind, you're hawking olives in Byzantium just to watch your abacus go up.
So, yeah, he makes a great point here, is that when the empire grows to a certain point and it's conquered everything, like, for example, controls all the Mediterranean, there does seem to be kind of a resting on your laurels, so to speak. It's like, wow, now we've achieved a lot, now let's enjoy it. There's no longer that kind of push for more. I think in the last 50, 60 years of the space race, or World War II before that, World War II forced, for example, the United States to pursue certain technologies. I mean, the U.S. put more money into developing the B-29 bomber than it did into the Manhattan Project, because it knew what it needed. Okay, we need a plane that can go this far and has this kind of range and can carry this many bombs and has these certain elements to it. Then it had to pour money and time and technology into getting to be able to do that. The space race. At the beginning of the decade of the 1960s, when John F. Kennedy gives that speech and lays out the plan to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, we were nowhere near being able to do that. And there were so many giant leaps in technology that they knew they needed to achieve to be able to get there. But the space race caused it to happen. What he's complaining about here is that there's no longer any competition for the Romans in the Mediterranean, and so it has caused them to become complacent and to stop being kind of pushing themselves to the edge.
Read. But anyway, how many winds are there? The ancients recognized 4, but that's clearly not enough. The next generation overcorrected, brought it up to 12, and shit got messy, inelegant. So today, us modern folk take the middle of the road with a nice even 8 total, 2 for each quarter of the heavens, and they've got a bunch of fun names. And yeah, if we wanted to add in the old reject winds, we could. And there's even a couple extra secret winds only recognized by a select few. Plus, there's certain winds that only blow in certain regions of the world, but, broad strokes, 8'll do you fine. These winds each blow at their various allotted times of the year, and the winter ones make for particularly rough seas. In former times, pirates were compelled, by the fear of death, to rush into death and to brave the winter ocean. Now we are driven to it by avarice. Direction isn't the only difference between the winds, though. They can all be characterized by their temperature, their moisture, and the kind of weather they tend to bring. Volturnus is dry, Septentria brings snow and hail, Auster is sultry, Aquilo is the most healthy. Real motley crew, those winds. Well, while those guys are generally pretty calm, we must also consider the sudden, violent gusts we call storms. Storms are self-contained events that come in a few flavors themselves, like eknephius, which brings thunder and lightning, or typhon, which doesn't. Certain storms also give rise to whirlwinds, which are these giant, loud pillars of wind and moisture that destroy everything in their path. They are so dense that they can actually support themselves on the ground, and if they happen over the sea, they suck up the water as they go. Thunderstorms produce lightning, and lightning is crazy. It has this unique property where it can damage things on the inside while leaving the outside unharmed. It can empty casks of their wine without breaking the vessel itself, and it can melt gold and silver without burning the bag they're in.
I love these little detailed observations that he's making. There's so much information here. The Roman Empire, one of the reasons we know so much about it is because so much of what they wrote has survived, and he's one of the great examples of that.
One time, a noblewoman named Marcia was struck by lightning while pregnant, and while the baby got fried, she herself survived without injury. Many people believe that when lightning strikes a man, it can be used to predict his future, with terms and conditions, of course. Some historians also state that man is capable of invoking lightning. The author L. Piso said that the ancient king Numa did it all the time. Then his successor, Tullus Hostilius, tried to imitate him, but he didn't do the ceremonies right, so he just got electrocuted. Is any of this true? Maybe. At the very least,
the opinions entertained on this on this point are very, very various. And I got this thing in the way, so I can't see it all. To believe that we can command nature is the mark of a bold mind, nor is it less the mark of a feeble one to reject her kindness. Interesting.
Fortune-telling thing. Now, we all know that we see lightning before we hear thunder. That's nothing special. It's just because light has a greater velocity than sound. It's the same event. Yep. Thunder's just the sound that 100%. Lightning makes. Fun fact, man is the only animal that isn't always killed by lightning. Any other creature, instant death every time, but we're special. Lightning can strike just about anything, except for laurels, seals, and eagles. They're all safe. It also never descends more than 5 feet into the ground. So if you're someone who's scared of lightning, your best bets are deep caves or a tent made out of seal skin. Besides all this normal weather, we do have records of some real weird stuff falling from the sky. It has rained milk and blood on many occasions. One time it rained flesh, and the fallen meat that wasn't eaten by birds just didn't rot. You know, your casual immortal meat storm. One time it rained wool. Another time there was a shower of baked tiles.
I wonder if he... Let me go back to this.
Falling from the sky. It has rained milk and blood on many occasions. One time it rained flesh, and the fallen meat that wasn't eaten by birds just didn't rot, you know.
So there's reference in the Old Testament to when the people of Israel have left slavery in Egypt and they're wandering in the desert, that God sends manna, which manna basically is just their word for, I don't know what this is, so they called it manna, and quail for them to eat. So it makes me wonder if maybe this is a reference to that, or he heard that story at some point, or if it's just something completely unrelated.
Your casual immortal meat storm. One time it rained wool, another time there was a shower of baked tiles. What a country, huh? Stones have been known to fall from the sky now and then. The Greeks like to brag about how the philosopher Anaxagoras correctly predicted such an event, but I find that dubious. We know a stone fell, it was like a wagon load big, but I think Anaxagoras just got lucky. I mean, the guy said it would fall out of the sun. What are you on about? The sun can't do a rock, it doesn't have rocks. Finally, rainbows are nothing special. We get them all the time. They don't predict the weather or anything else, they're just something that happens. Rays of sunlight hit a hollow cloud and they get refracted. And the colors are due to a mixture of clouds, air, and fire. Let's come down from the air.
I mean, not totally, inaccurate, but I guess... that's one of those ones that it seems to me like you'd have a fairly good understanding. Like they know that rainbows would appear when there's been rain, but then there's also sunshine. And even we kind of know enough to have a fairly good idea of when there might be a rainbow in the sky based on the conditions.
Air onto the earth. Good old Mother Earth. The other 3 elements are bastards. You never know when they're going to turn on you. Fire burns us, water pelts us as hail and floods our villages, air rages in squalls, but Earth, she's just hanging out. And what a bounty she has for us, giving us crops, flowers, medicinal plants. In her compassion, she even gave us poison, so when life sucks, we can kill ourselves quickly.
Socrates.
And what does man do? Naturally, we take advantage of her kindness. We torture her for all the iron, timber, and stone she can bear, and then we use that iron to tear out her entrails in search of gems to put on.
What indeed she endures on her surface might be tolerated, but we penetrate also into her bowels, digging out the veins of gold and silver, the ores of copper and lead. We also search for gems in certain small pebbles. Driving our trenches to a great depth, we tear out her entrails in order to extract the gems with which we may load our fingers. That's pretty interesting.
On our fingers. Do you know how many hands have to be worked to the bone just to decorate one joint of another? Honestly, if hell existed, all this greedy digging would get us there. But, of course, whatever we take from her, we all pay back in blood and bones eventually. World keeps turning. Just wish y'all weren't such ingrates about it. Anyway, as we said, the Earth is a perfect sphere, except for, mountains and valleys, but close enough. There's a question we get all the time when people first learn about this, particularly from the commoners. They'll go, right, if Earth's a ball, why don't people on the other side fall off? To that I say, why doesn't the whole thing fall down? Where would it go if it did? Up into the other sky? That doesn't make sense. No, the Earth is right where it belongs. Then they'll say, alright, fine, but why's the ocean flat then? Guess what? It's not. Here, take a glass of water, fill it to the brim, then drop a little something in there. See that slight, subtle curve? That's the ocean. You can see it when a ship goes out to sea. The bottom bit will disappear over the horizon before the mast does, and so it goes all the way around.
That is one of those things that got attributed to Christopher Columbus, that he was like, oh, well, you can see the mast. That's how we know the Earth's round. Again, we've got somebody 1,500 years before Columbus writing the exact same thing.
Brown. One time some Indians got blown off course by a storm and ended up in Germany. Side note, this was not the first nor the last time the translator started his annotation with this exact 11-syllable sigh of frustration. The ocean they must have crossed had to be massive, like half the globe. Real quick, let's think about how much of the world is even inhabitable. We got one hemisphere over here, which is divided into 5 zones, right? On the top and bottom, miserable, nothing but cold and darkness. In the middle, sun's too close, burns everything, miserable. So already we only got a fifth of the place to ourselves. Then take into account all the seas and mountains and wilderness and other crap in the way, there's barely anything left. And this is what every war in history has been over, this tiny portion of what amounts to a speck in the universe. Even if you conquered the world, you just barely started. And how much of it can you bring with you to the grave, huh? So the Earth is in the middle of the universe, and we know this because of the equinoxes. Day and night, perfectly balanced on these 2 dates. We're right in the middle, it just makes sense. There's plenty of other proof that we live on a globe. Certain stars can only be seen from different parts of the world, and that's because the Earth's in the way. Just ask a sailor, they'll see new stars squink their way out of the horizon as they go. Also, eclipses show that the time of day depends on your east-west position. A few years back, the same eclipse of the sun, the same exact event, was seen at 8 in Campania, but at noon in Armenia. Try explaining that one, planists. Here's another. One time, a courier...
I love the fact that he's ripping on flat earthers 2,000 years ago. That's fantastic.
Polonides ran from Sicyon to Elis, which is a distance of 1,200 stadia. The way there took him 9 hours, but then the return trip took him 15. And it's not because he was tired or took a break somewhere. Brother, he ran against the sun. Likewise, the length of shadows on a given day depends on your latitude. In Egypt, on the summer solstice at noon, their sundials cast a shadow half the length of the pointy bit, whereas in Venice, at the very same hour, the shadow's as long as the pointy bit. If you keep going south, eventually you'll reach a point where the sun's straight up at the solstice. Yep. We dug a well in a town called Syene just to check, and sure enough, it's light all the way down. If you go even further south, you'll notice the sun do that twice a year at equal distances from the solstice. There's also a place in India where there just aren't shadows, ever, and as a consequence, the people there don't know what hours are. But because of the way the sun moves, you'll notice that the longest day of the year is longer the further north you go. In Alexandria, on the summer solstice, they get 14 hours of daylight. In Italy, it's 15, and in Britain, it's 17. Following this pattern, we believe that at the very North Pole, it's 24, meaning they get 6 months of daylight at a time, with 6 months of night on the other side.
That's, again, having not been to that part of the world, the fact that people knew that, or that it was nearly so, is pretty remarkable.
The difference in climate based on latitude is clearly reflected in the nations that live there. For one, the Ethiopians... Let's talk about earthquakes. The Babylonians used to blame these on the movements of the...
Now he has me curious as to what the Ethiopians, what he said about them that he didn't include.
Stars. One guy is even said to have predicted an earthquake through astrological means. Is that true? I'll let you be the judge. I, for one, believe that earthquakes are caused by the winds. Think about it. Before an earthquake, it's always very calm. The seas are tranquil. There's not a single bird in the sky. Why? No wind. They can't fly. Where'd the wind go? Underground. It gets stuck down there and it builds up until finally hell literally breaks loose. It starts off with a horrible noise like cows mooing or people fighting.
And here's what's remarkable thinking about the fact that he's writing about earthquakes is that he ends up dying in an incident at Mount Vesuvius that begins with a bunch of earthquakes, which actually were representing the geologic activity that was going on underneath that led to this eruption. It wasn't how he described it, but still, this is something that would take his life.
In the distance. Then everything shakes, hard. Whole city walls get knocked down, and sometimes the earth opens up and swallows them entirely. The shaking's even noticed by people on ships who get hit by waves without any wind. Earthquakes also make well water turn cloudy and smelly. So the obvious question is, what the hell can we do about it? Well, places with a lot of natural caverns or man-made sewers tend to get fewer earthquakes. That's because the underground air has an easy way to escape. Buildings that are arched or that lean against each other also tend to fare better in the event of an earthquake. Barring all else, at least things are usually over with quickly. Although some earthquakes have been known to last days, months, even 1 or 2 years straight. As for related anomalies, about a century and a half ago, 2 mountains slammed together and collapsed, and fire and smoke came from the ground where they stood. More recently, under Nero, there was a knight named Vectius Marcellus who woke up to find that his fields and olive grounds swapped places with each other. No ma'am or destruction, just, oh, this is over here now, okay? But just as Earth swallows up land in one place, she spits it back out elsewhere. As such, islands sometimes rise up spontaneously out of open sea. We have tons of records of these events across the Mediterranean. They're often accompanied by a giant fiery explosion and loads of dead fish floating everywhere. It's said that one time some people ate these fish, and then they too immediately died. But enough of tragedies. Let's turn back to the wonders of the Earth, such as there are many caverns filled with gas that instantly kills things. Some kill only birds, others kill everything but people, and still
the proverbial canary in the coal mine. Smaller animals tend to die faster because their body can't absorb as much of that material, and that's why birds would be carried in a coal mine, because if something happened to the bird, you knew that it was time to get out.
Kill everything and people. In a few caves, those who breathe the gas instead become intoxicated and start predicting the future, as is the case with the famous Oracle at Delphi.
That's fascinating to me that he's making that observation about the Oracle at Delphi. 100%.
We can ascribe these effects to the divine power of nature. I mean, what else could it be? How the hell do you explain that rationally? But while most islands are attached to the earth at the bottom, there are a few that float. The Calaminae Islands are not only moved by the wind, but the people on them can actually push them around with long poles to go wherever they want. There's another group of floating islands known as the Dancers, so called because they move to the beat of drums played on their surface. I've got a few more miscellaneous wonders here, let me just rattle them off. In Harpassa, there's a giant rock that can be moved by one finger, but not by the force of the whole body. In Paracini, there's a type of dirt that heals all wounds. In Troas, there's a stone that makes dead bodies dissolve. Near the Indus River, there's two mountains, one of which...
I wonder if that stone that makes dead bodies dissolve has some kind of some component of acid, or maybe it's lime or something.
Attracts iron and the other repels it. So if you had iron nails in your shoes, you couldn't step on the one or off the other. In Argyripa, the grania plant doesn't grow, and in Crustuminium, the hay springs up already rotten. Let's turn now to the tides. We know these are caused by the moon, and to a lesser degree the sun. Moon overhead, they go up, moon on the other side, they go down. A large open...
Again, I'm impressed that they knew that the moon caused the tides.
An ocean is needed to manifest this power of the planet, which is why neither lakes nor rivers have tides. In Britain, the tide rises 120 feet. The tides do a full cycle twice a day, except in Euboea, where they do it 7 times. Aristotle said that animals only die when the tide is ebbing, but really that's only true of people. Watch. Seawater is salty, and that's because the sun evaporates all the mild, sweet water while leaving all the gross crap that ends up in the ocean behind. A number of estimates have been made for the depth of the ocean, ranging from 15 stadia to who the hell knows. Seawater is also heavier than fresh water, which is why things float better on it. As with everything in nature, bodies of water have no shortage of weird stuff they get down to. Some rivers actually run underground before bursting out again elsewhere. We know they're the same river because if you chuck stuff in one, it comes out the other side. There's a lake in Judea where nothing sinks at all. In Dodona, there's a spring called the Fountain.
He's talking about the Dead Sea, and that's because there's so much salt content because of the nature of how the water collects there and just builds up the salt that you can literally just float in it.
Jupiter. And though the water there is cold as ice, it'll relight extinguished torches held near its surface. The river Melas turns sheep black when they drink from it, while the Cephasus makes them turn white. The Peneus turns them black again, and then the Xanthus makes them red. The river Astaces makes the horses there produce black milk, which the people use for food. There's a spring in the island of Andros that tastes like wine. The river Lyncestis tastes sour but gets you drunk like wine. And in Arcadia, there's a river called the Styx that kills you instantly. In Labrosis, there are 3 springs, all of which also kill you instantly, but in a much less painful fashion than the Styx. That's enough of those. From here we turn at last to the 4th element, fire. In Samosata, along the Euphrates, there's a big pool of this flammable mud they call maltha. It sticks to everything it touches, and if you set it on fire, even water won't extinguish it. Romans invaded these lands long ago, and the people there poured the stuff on our soldiers, cooked them in their armor like a crab. There's certain places in the world...
tar pits? They've got to be tar pits.
Where fire's always burning. The summits of many mountains are home to such flames, as are the occasional crater and field. And of course, the sun and stars are no exception. What a weird thing these are, like fire needs fuel to spread and sustain itself. So what is it that can feed these flames without destroying itself in the process? There's a thinker for you.
What must be the nature of that thing which in all parts of the world supplies this most greedy voracity without destroying itself? Interesting thing for them to think about.
But besides these guys, where else does fire come from? You got fires lit by men, for one. Certain stones have fire in them innately. There's the fire you get from rubbing sticks together, and there's the fire in clouds that causes lightning. You can also use concave mirrors to focus sunlight into fire. Highly potent, do be careful. Sudden fires also manifest occasionally in the...
It also appears that there are sudden fires both in waters and even in the human body. Is he talking about spontaneous human combustion? Which is really freaky, by the way.
Human body. One time when 6th King of Rome Servius Tullius was a child, he was just sleeping there when suddenly flames shot out of his freaking head. I've got more fun facts like this to drop later, but it's about time we wrap this book up. And what better way than by sizing up the entire globe? So I ran some numbers, added some distances, checked some other people's answers. I've got some estimates here on the width of the inhabited world, from the mouth of the Ganges in India to the port city of Gades in the west. These all fall around 9,000 miles, give or take 1,000. But like I said before, the uninhabited Earth extends far beyond that. Eratosthenes was a really bright dude, and he put the circumference at 31,500 miles. What a big, wild world it is. Just how wild? You'll have to tune in next time for books 3 through 6, all of which are titled An Account of Countries, Nations, Seas, Towns, Havens, Mountains, Rivers, Distances, and Peoples who now exist or formerly existed. But for now, I'm Pliny the Elder, et gratias ago tibi, qui aspectandi.
That was really cool. There was a lot there, but I'm so glad that he covered that. What an interesting concept to take a look at something that not a lot of people talk about. So I'd really be curious to hear your thoughts about that and so much more. Let me know in the comment section below. Please do check out Salmonella. He's got so much fantastic content. I will pin down in the description a playlist to all of my Salmonella reactions, so you can check those out without my commentary. Be prepared in case these are things you're concerned about. Many of them are not very family friendly. I think still my favorite might be, and it might be the first one I ever did, is Terrare. It's just nuts. Thanks for watching.